All right. Welcome to Black Representation in the Curriculum, conversations on equity and belonging in the curriculum. And so I am so thrilled to have our guest today. I'm thrilled and honored, I should say, to have Dr. Joyce King here today. And first, I have to kind of start with a little preface because um, Dr. King's work has been one of the few works that I felt really supported what I did. In my work, I do have your two books, and there are some parts of your work that I tend to cite frequently and talk about frequently. Um, I could tell you more about that as we talk.
I'm happy to know that.
Yeah. And so even I didn't tell you even the last talk I did I actually posted a past talk and you get to see parts of where I quoted you in that past talk that I posted.
How wonderful. I
Um
appreciate that so much. Well, I'm an admirer
Thank
of
you.
your work. And so, the cultural connection in education have often focused on history or literature, and someone to bring out culture and science was
Mhm.
groundbreaking. And I really want to commend you for um,
Thank you.
going the route.
Thank you. It was a hard route, but I'll I want to really thank you for being here, and I'm so excited to, get to know more about you and your work.
Mhm.
And I want to. I have seen. I know you had shared a podcast and with me, and I really want to use this opportunity to delve into and have some, conversations. I think every time I listen to you, and even the last time I remember you came to give a talk, um, I do remember some of what you said,
Mhm.
and that was years ago. So I'm
Yep.
excited. Um, so why don't we start by you introducing yourself to the audience, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. My name is Joyce Elaine King, and I'm currently a professor at Georgia State University. I hold the Benjamin E. Mays Endowed Chair for Urban Teaching, Learning, and Leadership. That's a mouthful. That's how they put it together. And I've been at Georgia State since 2004. I came to Atlanta to serve as provost at Spelman College, and I was there for a couple of years and also on the faculty there. I came to Atlanta from New York, where I had worked at Medgar Evers College as associate provost. Before that, I was in the administration at University of New Orleans as a associate vice chancellor. I was doing administration for about 10 years after leaving my teaching position at Santa Clara University, where I was director of teacher education. For
Hmm.
12 years prior to that, I was a visiting professor at Stanford. Before that, I was founding director of ethnic studies at Mills College in California. So I've been in the business for about 50 years. I taught my first sociology class. My background is sociology and Black studies. I taught my first sociology class as an undergraduate.
Hmm.
Um, I was a student activist and helped to establish the program in African American Studies at Stanford. And at the same time, I was based in the community of East Palo Alto, and I taught a sociology class at Nairobi College in East Palo Alto. East Palo Alto was very unique in that the education innovations and really revolution that were going on then in the 60s, including establishing Nairobi College, which was a private system of education for Black people from preschool all the way up to community college. So I had that kind of exposure to um, transforming education, and I would say education for liberation.
Wow.
From California. I grew up in the valleys from
Hmm.
Stockton, and I went to Stanford as an undergraduate freshman in 1965. My family had migrated to California from Louisiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas, that sort of story of how we moved from one place to the other. But my mother's people came to California in the 1930s before World War II. Uh, and then I grew up in Stockton and had the good fortune to be mentored by Black teachers. And that's how I got to Stanford. One of my community teacher mentors had been a student at Stanford. She graduated from Stanford in 1965. Mrs.
Mhm.
Carty Leonard, and she was from the Bay Area. She and her husband came to Stockton as Black teachers, and they looked out for Black children, and I ended up going to Stanford on a scholarship.
Wow.
So that's some of my story.
Awesome. I do have to say I am fascinated by your journey, especially, having heard a little bit about it. Um, and I was wondering, can you tell us about your journey that led to the work you're doing now and that led to the way you think about your work? Um, what led you here?
Well, I have to remind people that the 60s was a very particular historical period, and so there was
Mhm,
movement.
mhm,
When I arrived at Stanford in 1965, that's like the civil rights movement, lots of things going.
uh,
Students felt the need to advocate not only for ourselves, but for others. And we were very much identified with the Black community. My class of 1965 had the largest number of Black students that Stanford had ever admitted. We were 25.
mm,
The ones before me, they had maybe 4 or 3 Black students in their classes.
mhm,
I came from a community where people had known my mother growing up, which is kind of unusual in California. You think about, all these people coming from different places. But I was very rooted in a
mhm,
community. People knew me, they knew my family. The church was very important. So when I went to Stanford, my mother took me first to the community of East Menlo Park to meet
mm,
with a pastor who
mhm,
was in our church fellowship. And she said to the pastor, I'm bringing my daughter here because she's going to go to Stanford on the other side of town, but I want her to know where our people are. So
mhm,
that was
mm,
my entree to
mhm.
higher education through my own community.
Wow.
I was a first generation college. I was the first one to graduate from high
Mhm,
school. I had an older brother who had gotten into the prison industrial complex. I
mm,
grew up with 25 cousins. And so I had
mm, mhm,
I had a sense of belonging to people. But at
mhm,
Stanford at that time, the whole idea of assimilation and we're bringing you here so that you can sort of become something else and escape, whatever. I didn't have that. Wasn't my story. And
mhm,
so, I remember something happened that was very, very significant. My grandmother called one day,
mhm,
and I was in my dorm with my 2 roommates. One of them was a white girl from Texas, said she'd
mhm,
never been around Black people before. The other one was actually Native American, and her father was on the faculty, but she didn't look Native American. She was a blonde girl.
mhm, mhm.
And, my grandmother called, and I was talking to my grandmother on the phone, and that back in the day, they had a phone on the wall, like that old phone
Yeah.
that you had, so you didn't have any privacy, and my 2 roommates were
Right.
sitting there, and when I hung up after talking to my grandmother, they looked at me so strangely, and they said, "Couldn't understand a thing you said." And
Wow.
I switched back to, "Moi? What?" So I that was my awareness that I had come
Mhm,
into a space
mhm,
that I could fit into, but would it mean that when I left, I would no longer be able to talk to my grandmother? And so I was very conscious of this process of becoming, assimilating, adapting,
mhm,
accepting,
mm,
and that was part of our critique of the curriculum. There wasn't anything there
mm.
that who we were,
Mhm.
didn't tell our stories. And so out of that period, you get Black students, making demands on the institution to change. And that's what we did.
Mhm.
So
Wow.
my sense of who I am and what I do stems
Mhm.
from the value that I held then for the
Mhm.
knowledge in my community, and I never was feeling like I had to get away from who I was. So
Mm.
I the word epistemology that, there are ways in which some people's knowledge is valued and other people's knowledge is not acknowledged or even erased.
Mhm.
I had
Wow.
the experience of everything that I was being taught was erasing who I was and where I came from, and so I
Mm.
resisted.
Wow. My gosh. I have like 1,000 questions here. You know, let me hone in on something you said. I know that even today and even, pretty long after, still have people today who actually believe that what it is they have to offer in terms of knowledge is better. And I'm not just, honing in on just people who are white. I'm even thinking about, some of us. But and so I what is it have you've observed, and you've studied within communities as well, that really helped you to see um how our ways of knowing is not only different but important for us? What would you say to those people in terms of, based on what you've learned?
Well, I've had to say it over and over again to preserve my own sanity and identity. But, you're a learner. You're trying
Yeah.
to learn what will be helpful to you. So I came into a place where I thought there was going to be some tools for me
Mhm.
to use to solve problems that were needed in the community. So when I was an undergraduate, I was a sociology major. I was volunteering at the local high school. Kids couldn't read, real problems. And I go to the department chair to ask him um, for assistance to make my education more relevant. And I was
Mhm.
explaining the issues that I was dealing with. I said, I'm a sociology major because I thought sociology was about solving social problems. And so he asked me, he said, "Well, do you ever work crossword puzzles?" I said, I'm here talking to you about kids carrying guns and life and death issues, and you asking me about crossword puzzles?" He said, "Yes, because I don't think you have the intellectual capacity to do sociology. I think you should go down the road and study social work at San Jose State."
Mhm. Mm. Wow.
So I graduated with a BA in
Mm.
sociology with honors from that same and did
Wow.
work that I thought was relevant to the problems and the issues that I was concerned about. But, you know, it's a worldview. So you have people who have
Mhm.
accepted that worldview. Many of my
Yeah.
professors Jewish, and so they had assimilated. They considered themselves white, and they would say to me, why did professors say to me, "Well, we want you to do it the way we did it." Well, you all have erased yourselves, and I'm not here about erasure. But there's a
Mhm.
movement. It's not just me. There's a movement, and you can
Mm-mm.
see other people raising the same concerns. So you got Black students all over the country raising these issues. You've got,
Mhm.
the movement at San Francisco State calling
Mhm.
for Black studies and ethnic studies. So that movement, that context
Mhm.
opens up choices that you might not have
Wow.
had 5 years before.
Mhm.
I'll
Wow.
give you one more example of something that
Sure.
was really affirming for me. Now I'm
Mhm.
senior, I'm taking a theory class,
Mhm.
and I'm a Black student in the class, and the class is about what the sociologists call achievement motivation. And the professor
Mhm.
written a book about how different groups of people have different levels of achievement motivation, motivation to
Mhm.
achieve. That's his theory. So he's
Mhm.
to us why Native Americans are poor and living on reservations because they don't have any motivation to achieve. And the evidence that he cited was in folktales. And he said, you can look at Native American folktales and you can see the proof that they don't have any motivation to achieve. Look at Coyote, the character.
Mm.
He never wants to work. There you have the proof. And so our assignment was to use his theory and his quantitative measure of achievement
Mhm.
motivation to show that we had, observed this lesson. So
Mhm.
I was really incensed about again what you're trying to get me to believe. So I go to
Mhm.
my community library and I get African American folk tales and
Mhm.
European nursery rhymes. And I
Mhm.
use the quantitative formula that he had given us to
Mhm.
score African American folk tales and European nursery rhymes. So
Mhm.
Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after, and the score is 0. Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, etc., etc. Score 0. So I scored all
Mhm.
the European tales. Then I got the African American folk tales. And oh, so we talking about tricksters? Well, let's look at Brer Rabbit. Brer Rabbit was always bothering Brer Fox. So one day he tripped. Brer Fox got him and he said, I'm going to put you in the pot and cook you tonight. So Brer Rabbit, being as smart and clever as he was, said, oh, Brother Fox, please, you can put me in the pot. Just don't throw me over the fence to the briar patch. Fox said, what? So he threw the rabbit over the fence and the rabbit is jumping up and down. He said, I'm home. I'm home. Score 10. So I scored all the African American tales, all the European nursery rhymes, wrote it up, turned in my paper, and I got an A. So I used this formula, talking about
Mhm.
achievement motivation. 7 years
Talking
later,
about
talking about achievement motivation. 7 years
was okay,
later,
yeah.
when I'm a
Mhm.
professor at Santa Clara University, and the graduate student TA who was in that class is also a faculty member. And we're at a faculty party. This is 7 years later. And she asked me, she
Mhm.
said, Joyce, do you remember that paper you wrote for Professor So and so about achievement motivation? I said, yeah, I remember. I got an A. She said, we always wondered if that was your own work.
Wow.
So now, if I'm thinking from my own perspective in the interest of my
Mhm.
own people and other people that this system has denigrated, and you
Mhm.
all are sitting there talking, wondering if I'm cheating because I'm not thinking the way you're
Mhm.
thinking. So you see,
Yeah.
it's not just trying to convince somebody. It is
Right.
recognizing how this framework affects them and how then they affect
Right.
us. So I had
Mhm.
many examples in my own educational experience that reminded me that we're not on the same page and we have to be able to
Mhm.
for ourselves and use the knowledge that we're getting for the benefit of people.
Wait, I'm not hearing you. Da, 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 da.
Uh,
Oh.
um, it's okay now?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry. I keep
Huh?
forgetting there's a delay in the YouTube and that you're not talking now. I was like, wait a
Okay.
second. I was just looking to make sure it's on. Wow. Okay. So wow. You know, let me say something that I haven't said,
Mhm,
honestly. One of the big reasons that I find myself drawn to being at HBCUs
mhm,
are those rich conversations I have with students in the classroom and having to present to students and to other faculty's classes in historically white universities. I get to see the stark difference, even in our the way we come to know, and being in our situation where things are constantly unpredictable, where we're at the mercy of people's emotions and feelings and thoughts. um, I don't think people realize how much thinking we have to do and how much thinking we have to practice, sometimes even to anticipate what may come next as a
Mhm.
survival mechanisms. We're
Oh,
constantly
sure.
making hypotheses,
Mhm.
predictions. Um, and so those conversations you have with those students in the classrooms are so amazingly rich that, you learn so much from understanding the way we think about things and why,
Mhm.
right? And when life has been a lull where it keeps coming to you, you can just sit there and sometimes just, I don't know, not have to engage in that level of thinking that we often have to.
Mhm. I understand what
Um,
you're saying. Yes, well, I've worked in HBCUs. I've worked in predominantly white elite universities, and I would say
mhm,
that in every context, there is this process of being for yourself and for your community, or as Malcolm said, getting getting the okey doke put on you where you're not really able to see things clearly.
mhm. Wow. I'm so curious also, when it comes to your scholarship, seeing where you've come to some of your conclusions, which I was, fascinated by, some of your conclusions. And the one that I frequently look at had to do with the importance, and I believe that's your book on heritage knowledge in the curriculum.
Mhm.
The ability of cultures to have their individual voice and what that means. Um, I'm wondering, can you speak to that a little bit? Because I think that even today, when we think about what's going on and what um, the approach, I realize the approach to even having us um, be able to use our own voice. So much of it is dependent on the economic pipeline, right? And so much of it is influenced by that. Can you speak a little bit about what's your journey been like? And you're thinking, over time of your scholarship and how you've approached it, the type of questions you asked over time and the type of evidence you sought over time and why. Um, how's that emerged?
Well, when I was an undergraduate at Stanford,
Mm-hmm.
taking a Western Civ course for a whole year and not learning anything about my own presence as an African ascendant person in this course,
Mm-hmm.
you don't know at the time
Yeah.
what's happening. You just feel
Mm-hmm.
ill at ease. Then I
Mm-hmm.
went and I was in Europe. I was a student study abroad in Italy. I spoke
mm-hmm.
Italian. I could relate to them. And I'm in a
Mm-hmm.
library in Florence, downtown,
Mm-hmm.
reading for the first time about the Harlem Renaissance. I didn't know about the Harlem
Hmm.
Renaissance. I hadn't learned
Wow.
about it in school. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
sophomore going up to a junior, and I'm reading about the Harlem Renaissance in Italian in Italy.
And in Italy.
And then I come back
Yeah.
to the US, and the Black Studies movement is bursting out. So in my
Mm-hmm.
own lived experience, I know why there's a need for what the student need
Mm-hmm.
for. So questions we're asking, they're not like just pulled out of air. They come out of history. Now I have classes with somebody like Sinclair Drake who's introducing me
Mm-hmm.
a black perspective on knowledge and on history, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
learning about the world in a way that has been omitted from my education. So that alerts
Yeah.
me
Yeah.
that there are other questions to be asked, but the questions come from
Mhm.
trying to be relevant to what the people need. Now,
Mhm,
fast
mhm,
forward, I'm a professor of teacher education, and the discourse or the framing of education is now multicultural education, diversity, and for the first time we're actually talking about cultural knowledge. We're saying that
mhm,
educators need cultural knowledge to meet the needs of the diverse students that they're going to be educating. was very different from the way I had experienced education, where the professors were telling us that there was something wrong with our culture. There was particularly something
Mhm.
wrong with Black mothers, the same way that my professor had said that Native Americans were responsible for their own impoverishment. Now we're hearing that it's Black mothers that don't talk to their children right, and that's why they're not ready for school. They don't read them books at night, and all this is our fault.
Mm.
So now we're saying, okay, well, but the teachers need cultural knowledge. This is a big transformation from that deficit thinking. But it occurred to
Mhm.
me today,
Yeah.
following the work of Dr. John Henrik Clark, who had written about what he called
Mhm.
heritage teaching. And heritage
Mhm.
teaching allows any group to place themselves, as he said, on the map of human geography. We all have
Mhm.
place of being in humanity.
Mhm.
So it occurred to me, well, if you're going to have heritage teaching, you're going to need some heritage knowledge. So the cultural knowledge is what teachers need, but the heritage knowledge is what
Mhm.
we bring from our own heritage, legacy, and lived reality. And so that's why I introduced the conceptualization of heritage knowledge. So that's the way knowledge
Mm.
transforms and th- things grow through time. The Harlem Renaissance didn't come
Mhm.
from nowhere. There were people thinking
Mhm.
these thoughts in the 1800s, before 1924 in Harlem.
Mhm.
So we're building on a
Mhm.
legacy that we learn about when we are educated properly within our own framework. But most of the time we're not. And so we don't
Mhm.
know the history and the lineage.
Wow. Um, can you go in a little bit into just give us a gist of what is the Harlem Renaissance?
Oh, well, that was in 1920s Harlem. We've just celebrated. We've been acknowledging that Dr. Carter G. Woodson established Negro History Week in 1926. This is now 100 years.
Mhm.
Negro History Week was transformed and became Black History Month. So the progressive era of the 1920s brought forth new ideas. On the white side, you had John Dewey. In other words, the educational philosophy changed over time. And in Harlem,
Mhm.
our poets, our writers, our creative
Mhm.
community produced a sort of revolutionary approach to valuing our knowledge and creative expression. So you had plays, you had Langston Hughes with his poetry, uh,
Mhm.
our writers producing new materials from our perspective. And that was
Mhm.
part of what has
Wow.
become known as the Harlem Renaissance. There are many names that we can cite that have been
Mhm.
celebrated for their originality and what they
Mhm.
produce, reflecting the culture and the perspectives of our people.
Wow. Wow. Oh my gosh.
Zora
Which
Neale
question do I ask
Hurston
you here?
wrote
Yep.
using African American quote unquote dialect.
Mhm.
But these are our classics. This is
Mhm.
our transformation of knowledge at that point. And it happens over and over again. We celebrate the Harlem Renaissance,
Yeah.
but that's not the only Renaissance that we've experienced as a people. You can take it all the way back to ancient Kemet, the Renaissance
Mhm.
of what what was produced in those ancient times.
Mhm. Wow. My goodness. Trying to figure which question I ask you here. I have like a thousand things in my head.
Let me ask you a
You know,
question.
I
Let me ask
okay,
you a question.
sure.
What was your experience growing up, and the people that were around you that you would say led you to recognize that the Gullah community had scientific knowledge? What happened to you?
Wow. Wow, I could talk about that for a long time, but the gist of it is, um, so I grew up really close to my grandmom. We lived at home with my mom, grandma, and my grandparents. Um, and I think because I grew up Well, I was born here, and I grew up, lived my early years in Guyana, and so growing up, I had cousins around me. It had to do with just like you said, embracing level of community. I always had cousins. I always had family. Um, I think it was taking the leap coming over here, um, and applying for college. I went through some crises. Crises in adjusting, like you said, adjusting and assimilating, like you said, trying to erase yourself in some ways. Having my background be redefined, how I identify myself there was different from how, you know, I was put in this box. And literally, you have check boxes, right? We just never checked off boxes before,
Mhm.
you know, and working so hard to assimilate, dealing with, I think, just going through, in hindsight, realizing how ashamed I was to be
Mhm.
me,
Mhm.
and the depths of that shame, right? That I also, and then when I went to teachers college, I remember the first class I took was the history of science education, the history of ideas in science ed, a book I had to read. And then I kept thinking, well, where are the African Americans and what were they doing at the time? And I was just trying to figure out what's going on here. I knew they existed. It's not mentioned here because you're always seeking yourself, right?
Mhm.
You're
Mhm.
taking classes. A white person is able to see themselves as they're
Mhm.
reading. They don't realize they're seeing themselves because it's all about them. But then you, as a black person with these books, you're trying to figure out, well, what does this have to do with me? Right? That's your journey because, and the thing is, we're always reminded, and for me, we're always reminded that it's not our journey because people make sure they let you know that's not your journey. That's not supposed to be your journey. Right.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
it led me in the archives. And this is me just taking a non-matriculated course, by the way. I just kind of happened to take this course because at the time my husband was in school, and I was like, okay, so you're in school. I'll just take a course. And so led me into the archives because I was like, where were the black people and what's happening during that time, the 1860s, whatever. And so I stumbled upon, oh my gosh, I stumbled upon, my goodness, what's her name? My mind is blank right now. Oh, I should know this. I stumbled upon her. I talk about her all the time, but for some reason I'm drawing a blank.
Mhm.
I stumbled upon her because in the 1860s, because she was one of a few black women, and I'm guessing she was probably mixed too, who was given the opportunities to learn a little bit about botany, um, attend some of these.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I started trying to figure out, how do I abstract from her experiences to figure out the science, because mixed in there was all the stuff about slavery, right? It was all the stuff that she was fighting. She was fighting for black people in the middle of that. And so it led me down a journey of trying to figure out what was happening. Like if I were to understand the science, what was happening, it led me to think places like Charles Drew. And
Mhm.
I got his
Mhm.
dissertation. I was trying to abstract the science. And by the way, and I did notice you had a chapter in Charles Drew in your book too.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
I don't know if you knew, I had created a curriculum, related to Charles Drew and looking at his science and and how it relates to the biology I teach, and looking at diffusion, and
So
because I taught biology
self-discovery,
for 16 years.
it's
What's
self-defense,
that?
it's self-discovery,
Mm-hmm.
self-defense, and self-determination. So either you're gonna be a human being and be fully, in your own agency, or you will allow this system to make you disappear and you become a tool for how that's going to affect other people. And that's our
Yeah.
humanity. We choose to be on the side of fully being human. And like you say, it's a journey.
Yes.
Then you start looking and then you get more affirmation. And along the way, you have some resistance, but you keep choosing over and over again not to be erased.
Wow.
For your grandmother.
My goodness. Yes. Absolutely. Constantly go back to her and remembering, fondest things about her. Um, during the pandemic, one of the things we learned because our family did a little WhatsApp, I did not notice about her, but it makes sense in hindsight. When she got married, she refused to let people straighten her hair. She refused to have her hair straightened for her wedding. She couldn't figure out why, and I remember she always had these beautiful curls, and as a little girl, I used to remember I would just put my hand in her hair and was playing with her fine curls, and, it's something that sticks with me to this day.
Mhm.
Um, the determination she had to not diminish herself
Yeah.
because of other people's perception,
Mm.
and and it keeps bringing me back to even what Charles Drew, said, talking about you're building brick by brick, and the type of bricks we have to build,
Mhm.
um, really has to do with building our humanity. We're still building our humanity, right?
Yeah. Yes. Mhm. So I'm glad to know about your
Um,
grandmother. And her hair.
Absolutely. It's amazing. I discovered after writing my children's series books. It's something we a lot of us have in common, right? People will tell me, "Oh yeah, I had that experience."
Mhm.
Because I feature grandmothers in those books as well. It's what we do. We don't get sent to babysitter; we get sent to our grandmothers, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
Um.
I had a babysitter who was from Jamaica. So if you can imagine,
Mm,
I was maybe 4, and my mother chose this lady
mhm.
in the community to look after me. I only remember that
Mhm.
she was a little strange. She smoked a
Mhm.
pipe. She lived in a trailer, and she spoke differently. She didn't call me
Mhm.
Joyce, she called me
Mhm.
Jice. And so now fast forward again, I'm at
Mhm.
Stanford University going to attend a lecture by a young man who became very, very important for his study of Marcus Garvey, Robert Hill.
Mm,
Well, Bobby was then a
mm,
graduate student, and we were walking across campus, and he said to me, "Oh, in Jamaica, we would call you Jice." Ding, 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 ding. All kind of bells are ringing because now I
mhm.
understand that my babysitter must have been from Jamaica. Well, what is this lady doing in the 1950s in California from Jamaica? But she's the
Mhm.
person my mother chose to look after me. And so
Mhm.
from a very young age, I had experiences with other Black people, with other
Mhm.
experiences, which later on as
Mhm.
you grow, these experiences make more sense to you. So I had a baby
Absolutely.
called me Jice. She smoked a pipe and she was a little different. And I remember asking my mother, "Why do you call her Miss Lorraine?" And my mother explained to me. Now I'm 4 years old and I understand my mother is saying her Miss. My mother said because of her white hair, because she's an elder.
Mm.
So these
Huh.
lessons we bring from our elders, from our ancestors, and we understand that
Mhm.
we are our ancestors. They are living through us.
Yes. Mhm. Absolutely. Wow. Um, my goodness. I'm so curious. It's funny. I'm holding back and asking some questions, and I realize I should just go for it.
Yeah.
I'm so curious as to in your journey in figuring this out, and even in terms of your research. Um, I wonder where shame comes in, I guess, just to put it bluntly, because I know that it's something we've constantly have to deal with to the point where I was so tempted to write my whole book on that instead of just doing one talk or one chapter. Um, what have you come across about that?
Never experienced anything like shame. Uh,
Mm.
we were poor,
Mhm.
could say we were impoverished. We lived in a part of town with other poor people, but we were
Mhm.
rich in our relationships.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
um, I went to work in the fields with my grandmother.
Mhm.
My grandmother didn't have formal education, but one of the
Mhm.
first chapters I wrote about, let's say, multicultural education, I talked
Mhm.
about my grandmother and my memory of going to work with her. We would get
Mhm.
up before day, it was dark, and we would walk up
Mhm.
to the corner store where the labor bus would come and pick the people up to take them to the fields. And when my
Mm.
grandmother walked up, everybody would stand back because she was recognized as one of the best workers in the community.
Mhm.
I
Wow.
remember feeling pride that I was walking with my grandmother and everybody stood back. And when we got to the
Mm.
fields, we were picking strawberries. She was so
Mhm.
fast that she would go way down the road and leave me, but she left me in the care of some Filipino workers. So she
Mm.
could go ahead and make her baskets. They were slower
Mhm.
and they helped me fill up my baskets. So this is a community of people who had respect
Mhm.
for each
Right.
other. I didn't have shame.
Mhm.
Yeah, we were out in the fields picking strawberries, but I wasn't ashamed. I was proud because my grandmother was one of the best
Mhm.
workers in the community. And when she came on the scene, people stood aside to let her pass.
Mhm.
So I didn't
Yeah.
have any shame. I remember people
Right.
make me feel ashamed, but it
Mhm.
didn't work because I had a foundation.
Yeah. Wow. And that foundation is so important. One of the things I realized too, I have been and I am very intentional, even in terms of what I expose my son to. And the truth is, I am deeply concerned. I mean, he's 13 now, but I am deeply concerned about, what will happen, if
Mhm,
he goes to college and,
mhm,
where should he go to college? Because there's such a balance between the need to make sure your identity doesn't diminish and what you achieve, right? And so it's the first time I've thought about it in terms of because even though I went to Columbia, you graduate undergrad and grad, you went to these Ivy League, and then you start to realize that the importance of attending those Ivy Leagues were not so much in what you directly gained because it's given, but in what you've had to fight for
mhm.
because it wasn't there.
Yeah.
And so that's my thinking now. Because in joining our recent church, we had the opportunity to celebrate Watch Night for the first time.
Mhm, mhm,
And understanding what
mhm.
that is and having him listen to these men and women talk about their experiences in their past, and it's so invaluable now. I think more than ever, we need more of that community, not less of it.
Well, I'm very grateful for, the way that I was raised to be
Mhm.
proud of myself, but to also honor other people. I mentioned the Filipino men working in
Mm.
the fields. My grandmother lived next door to a Mexican family, and they owned a store, and we called them
Mhm.
mom and pop. And I
Mhm.
remember, the way they cooked and the tortillas. And I mean, there was a way in which our community valued humanity. So
Mm.
there was no, I'm good, so therefore you have to be bad. Our our heritage also includes that valuing of other human beings. That's how I was
Mm.
raised. So there was
Yeah.
no way that
Mhm.
you could make me choose to put someone else down in order to elevate myself. So when we were
Mm.
activists at Stanford and we made our demands, the Black students' demands included what we felt needed to be offered or provided for Native Americans, for Latinos. So if you look at the 10 demands that the Black students at Stanford organized in 1968, there were also
Mhm.
calls for the benefits that other groups needed. That's just being
Absolutely.
human. That's just being human.
Mhm. Right. Wow, my goodness. Um, I remember, when it comes to our way of knowing and thinking about things and valuing others, I remember a story you shared, and you don't have to say it if you don't want it, but that story you shared stuck with me because, I have seen that movie 1,000 times. I think you probably know what I'm talking about. You could feel free to share that one or others in terms of lessons learned, because I think part of the way I've approached my work, and I suspect you probably think along these lines too, because your work is one of the few that resonated with me, and part of it was also approaching this, I guess in some ways, this fight from a constructivist approach, something we sometimes don't think about because it's very easy for us to view white people positively and black people with a deficit perspective. But I felt like I really needed to, like, I would take, you know okay, so one of the things sometimes I get criticized for is not using enough of our work.
Mhm.
Whereas because my approach has been, especially in the past, to take that same work that people have done and kind of turn it over and say, well, you could think of it this way too.
Mhm.
Um, and so that story you said stuck with me, and I think I have
Do
a
you
suspect you
remember
know
which
what I'm
film
talking
it
about.
was? I
Yes, I
use
do.
films. Which film was it?
It was Braveheart.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay. So, I learned about the European practice, which was called the first night. I learned about that from Bernice Johnson Reagan, who was a folklorist. She founded Sweetheart in Iraq, but she was also very well informed about culture. And she told in a presentation, she told the story about how the European colonization process worked, that in the, I guess you say, the Middle Ages, when one group was colonized, in this case by the British, their practice was to, on the night of the wedding, the woman would have to go and spend her first night with the colonizing lord. So in the film Braveheart with Mel Gibson, he's the hero, there's a
Mhm.
wedding scene. And I asked
Mhm.
my students, I said, "Have you seen the film Braveheart?" Because what I'm teaching is how this
Mhm.
worldview limits your ability to
Mhm.
interpret what you're actually seeing with your own eyes. If you don't have the framework conceptually, what you're looking at,
Mhm.
you can't interpret it. So the students say, "Oh, yeah, we've seen the film." That's good. Okay, so what happens in the wedding scene? They don't
Mhm.
even remember. Well, I said, "But you said you saw the film." So the wedding scene, there's a couple, they get married, and then all of a sudden the soldiers come, they bust up the wedding, and they take the bride, and they're taking her up the
Mhm.
hill so that for the first night she's
Mhm.
going to have sex with the colonizing lord, because their philosophy
Mhm.
is to breed out the indigenous people with their own blood. So my students say, "Well,
Mhm.
we don't remember that." You don't remember it because you don't have the knowledge to interpret what the film is
Mhm.
telling you. So this is our introduction to how colonization works. You see
Mhm.
it in the film,
Yeah.
but you also have to understand how it works on you. So you don't have the
Yeah.
historical knowledge to interpret what has happened in your own history. And I say, there's no black people in this scene.
Mhm.
It's all Europeans. But it's the way that the Europeans have made a hierarchy over who's better and whose genetics should prevail over others. And so it allows us to talk about the process of domination and how your own
Mhm.
thinking is a result of that domination. So I use a lot of film
Mhm.
to
Wow.
create a space for us to think about history in a very concrete way
Mhm.
that is not framed in the current black white binary. 'Cause there's no black people in
Absolutely.
it. But
Um,
now we can say, okay, so when oppression works, you've got to have an oppressor and you got the oppressed. And how does that process of domination actually work?
mhm. Wow. You know, it's amazing though. It's amazing how our worldview and our frames of reference, um, leads us to hone in on the fact that this was this romantic scene of this person, um, running after and going and rescuing her, as opposed to she's really being taken off and raped by a king, right? We don't really, our frame of reference. It makes me wonder, and I don't know how, to what extent you've looked at that. Uh, what else is passed down in our thinking? Because that thinking prevails today, right? The way we put some people on a pedestal,
Mhm.
to the extent that it influences our interpretations of
Mhm.
their actions, right? We might diminish the bad
Mhm.
actions until it has to get so bad.
Mhm.
We diminish it so much that it becomes normalized.
Well, it's all about our identity and who we're prepared to identify with. So we're
Mm,
prepared to identify with a particular narrative. I mean, it's so deep. It happens from a
mm,
very young age. All the stories of princes and princesses, and you know, you
yeah.
end up wanting to be somebody else totally without knowing your own story or knowing really the truth of that story that you've been given. So we have to sort of unfreeze these
Mm,
conceptualizations that keep us identifying with a system that is really dehumanizing everybody.
it's amazing, but not everybody thinks it's being dehumanizing to them, right?
Because you aspire,
Because
you're aspiring to be the winner. You're aspiring to be the beautiful one. You're aspiring to be saved. I mean, all of those myths that don't allow you to truthfully engage with the world. Another film that I
mm,
reference with my students is Star Wars. So I'm dating myself because the
mm,
people I teach, they weren't children for Star Wars, right? But there's a scene in Star Wars where the evil character Darth Vader, he has this Death Star, right? And so he's
mhm,
able to use this weapon to demolish an entire planet. He shoots the Death
mhm,
Star and the whole planet disappears. And the narration
mhm,
says, and there was a collective sigh in the universe. In other words, the universe is mourning the loss of all those souls. And I ask my students, where is our collective sigh for what is happening in the universe to other people? The movies tell us a lot. They don't hide anything. They have it right there
they
in your
do,
face. But if you don't have the knowledge to interpret it, it goes right over your head because you're focused on something else.
right. It reminds me of the idea of, what does truth mean, right? What does truth mean when you don't have that frame of reference, right?
Mhm, mhm. Well, what
Like,
Black Studies has offered me, my education as a Black Studies student and scholar, is a lens to reinterpret our own history and experience. I remember learning that our gospel songs and our tradition of um, music, the lyrics,
mhm,
the poetic nature, it's our worldview, it's our epistemology. And I remember the
mhm,
interpretation when they sang, "When I get to heaven, gonna put on my shoes and walk all over God's heaven." What
mhm,
what they were saying is, we know that the story of heaven that you've been telling us is your story, but it is
mhm,
not the only way of understanding what heaven is about. And when I get to heaven, I'm going to put on my shoes because you deprived me of shoes. when I get to heaven, I'm gonna put on my shoes and walk all over God's heaven, not the heaven that you've been
Yeah.
describing. Imagine these are enslaved people reinterpreting
Mhm.
the narrative that they've been given and singing that song in front of the oppressive masters because they have an epistemology that is affirming of their humanity. And so
Mhm.
when we learn
Right.
that that's what our ancestors did, we can say, oh my goodness, we come from those people. Well, what should we be doing
Mhm.
today to fulfill the possibilities that they sacrificed for us to be here?
Wow. And not only what should we be doing, but how do we get there? How do we get there when, I mean, you have over 80% of teachers are white, and even the teachers are black, we're often out of touch with, that knowledge.
Hmm.
Often we didn't grow up in such a way, and so these patterns get carried down, these patterns get perpetuated by all of us really, right? By everyone who might
Anybody
not be
is
seeking to
susceptible,
build that way.
right? It can get in
What?
anybody. This
Yeah.
anti-human worldview can get in anybody. But when you're in community, when you have a connection to your grandmother or anybody else that has taught you to
Mhm.
be a human being, that is your opportunity to affirm a different way of being. It doesn't have to be this way. We are on our journey to make a difference. I may not get there with you, but I'm on my way and I believe that, we have some possibilities because of who we are and the price that's been paid for us to be here. So in that sense, you just keep going.
Yeah. Wow. You know, one of the challenges, one of the directions I've taken, even with my work, is I'm in the implementation phase where I recently implemented with Black homeschoolers.
Mhm.
Um, just to really, and then I have to say, and hopefully, we're working on a publication and hopefully it should be out soon. But I bring that up because I think even when I've been at talks recently and I kind of spoke up on some things that I observed. Um, because the view of we have of black parents, um, the way we diminish black parents, I'm still trying to figure out some of that. And I sound naive saying this, but just because I ask myself questions, like where did that come from? Like what is that, right?
Mhm.
Why do we not only diminish black parents, because it's so pervasive to the fact that even in my own experience as a teacher and in observing other you know districts or teachers engage, I still see how districts position themselves in such a way that even a teacher, even if you want to, you can't really connect because it's just I don't know. It's that pattern and experience that overshadows just how we view black parents and interact. I don't know. Can you shed some light on that in terms of, what's been your experience and and even in your work and ways of knowing?
So we learn these ways of thinking about other people. And there's
Mhm.
there's just a human tendency. You don't want to see yourself as the problem. So the problem must be somewhere
Mhm.
else. Um, in a school setting, whether it's a district level or an individual school, you have to look, well, where are the incentives? What's the norm here? How does this institution or this cultural setting reward certain behaviors and not others? So you have to
Mhm.
kind of unlearn some things in order to replace those ways of relating to people with something more communal, more positive. But where do you get an opportunity to learn that as a professional? Has it been part of your professional education? Maybe not. So then,
No.
there's opportunities to hear another interpretation, but can you actually hear it if you're being rewarded for doing other things? And anybody who's going against
Mm.
the grain If you're going against the grain, you're gonna get a pushback. "Well, we don't do that here," or "What's wrong with you?" Must
Mhm.
So you have to be strong enough to believe that there's another way, even while you're trying to learn how to implement that other way. But what I always believe is that it's much more likely that you can be successful when you're not alone, when you have someone else that you're working with in collaboration with. That collaboration could be with a parent, it could be with another teacher, but the idea that you're not alone is what will sustain you to go through the process of making things different because it's not automatic. And you make some mistakes. It's not just a straightforward thing, but you have to discover a way to make the change that you're looking for. When my children were in elementary school, I was organizing parents. Parents come together, something's wrong. Let's see what can we do to make things different. So our
Mhm.
parent group, we were
Mhm.
meeting and some of the parents said, "Well, let's paint the teacher's lunchroom and put new curtains in there, and maybe they will treat our children." Well, I knew that wasn't going
Mm.
to make the difference. So, but what I did, I went across
Mhm.
town, had a friend on the wealthy side of town, and I asked her to give me her children's homework. So I came back to the parent meeting and I said, I want to show you guys the homework that the kids are getting over there. So when the parents saw
Mhm.
they said, "Forget about the painting the lunchroom and those curtains. We're gonna deal with this curriculum." But you see, this is learning. This is sharing. But I didn't
Uh-huh.
say you guys are
Yeah.
all wrong. You don't know what's happening. You have to be a part of a process of enlarging people's understanding. And so the parents said, "Oh no, we're gonna deal with this curriculum." And we did
Mhm.
as a collective group.
Mhm.
That was a decision that came from more information.
Right. Wow. I had a conversation with a teacher. She had both black and white students in her class. And it's funny, I'm still trying to convince her to, hopefully we will do a podcast. But we had this conversation, where she observed, the books on the shelves, and then the white kids would run and read these books and grab them, and the black kids weren't. And so I was putting myself in these black kids' shoe, and I'm thinking, especially now, especially with what's happening, I won't want to touch those books.
Mhm.
I wouldn't want I would feel like it was an assault on my psyche, you know? And even it's interesting because I have that conversation with my husband about reading that. And then sometimes my mom brings these books and I said, no, that's not a book I can have him read. I know you gave me to me when I was growing up, but I don't want him his sense of self to be diminished.
Mhm.
Like mine was reading that book as if it's the norm, right?
Mhm.
Um And so, we talk about this because, I realized after so many years, yeah, I was able to find some books for my son. He likes his adventures and he found, Tristan Strong and all these things. But then, I understand why he's not he can't pick up a book and read other than, he reads Harry Potter, and he's read those since he was probably 5 or so, but can't really grab these books to read. Um, I'm not worried about it, to be honest, because he's learning literacy in other ways, he's
Mhm.
learning literacy from reading other things and he's doing fine and well with it in his interpretation. But the way we define literacy and the things that we actually think is okay,
Mhm.
um, especially for our Black kids, we just can't do it without parents.
You are
I don't
so
think we
right.
realize that we
We
can't.
need a partnership with parents. But is that on the curriculum for teacher preparation? How to partner with parents? Where do people get the opportunity to do that? So the parents
Mhm,
have had experiences that make them look at the educators with suspicion. And the educators have had
mhm,
experiences that make them look at the parents with suspicion. And meanwhile, the
mhm,
people running the show are, they getting away scot free because we're distracted by the ways that they've
mhm.
divided us.
Well, I think I see someone wrote something in a chat. Before I go to the chat, with any questions, I said. It's I'm live here, not just on YouTube.
Mhm.
Let's see. Okay. I thought someone wrote something in the chat. It comes up. Interesting. Okay.
See,
Sorry, my
Jerome
thing is in the way.
Morris enjoying this interview with Dr. King. Hey, Jerome.
I'm on the Oh, I see. It's bringing up what was on YouTube. Okay, I thought somebody else wrote something else in the chat. Okay. Oh my goodness. I'm curious as to whether or not I guess I was thinking of this more and more, realizing that sometimes we approach this uniquely. Have you ever thought of making your syllabi available just out of curiosity, or have you
Yeah,
because
some
I've been
people
thinking
have.
about that more and more.
I've shared my syllabus, but the syllabus is just a document. It is not the pedagogy.
Yeah.
I mean,
Mm-mm.
you can't just take the syllabus and think that it's magically gonna produce certain outcomes, and I'm
Right.
very, you know, interactive and reciprocal, in the way that I teach, so what my students bring, I tell them that who you are and what your experiences are, that's as important for our experience as what I've put together on the syllabus, and in fact, I have
Mm-hmm.
a metaphor that I use. I tell the students, imagine there's an empty chair in the class and you're sitting in that empty chair. Everything that's inside of you is a part of what this class is about. So that means you
Mm-hmm.
have an opportunity to delve into your own lived experience, your own views, your own understanding, and bring that for the rest of us
Mm-hmm.
to benefit from. And I tell them that we're using a jigsaw method. It's a jigsaw method for
Mm-hmm.
elementary schools, but everybody has a piece of the puzzle. So we want to know what your piece of the puzzle
I
is
love
that
that.
you're bringing for us all to make this picture work. So that's not on the
Hmm.
syllabus. But what is on the syllabus are readings and media and a kind of, it's not even a chronology, but it's a mix that allows
Mm-hmm.
for knowledge to grow because I get students from different disciplines, different departments, and we have to kind of create a common framework for us all to relate to. And I start every
Mm-hmm.
class movie.
Wow. Wow. You started with a movie for the purpose of reflecting on
Uh,
themselves. Go ahead.
to,
I don't
to,
want
to
to.
create to create a common experience that we can return to.
Mm,
So
okay.
when I
Wow.
teach the social foundations of education, I start with a film called Black 47. And right away,
Mm,
some people are assuming that this is about Black people, but it's not about Black people. 1847 when the British colonized the Irish and how the Irish were
mhm, mhm,
starving really, really oppressed. And so again, now we're going back into another time frame, another cultural context. No Black people anywhere in this film, but you can see how oppression works. And these Irish people who were so brutalized by the process of colonization, they end up immigrating to the United States in the 1800s. And when they come to the United States
mm,
as brutalized Irish, they become white and they end up brutalizing Black people. So my students say, well, how
mhm,
could they
mhm,
do that? How could they do that? Let's think about that for a minute. So that's
yeah,
sociology of education. And when I teach sociology of inner city children, the film we start with is a film about the prison system, and it's called Writ Writer. It's about a Mexican
mhm, mhm,
American guy who became a jailhouse lawyer and how his case against the brutalization of the prison system helped to reform prisons in the United States, but it's a story of what happens inside the prison and the warden who is so terrible and just treating the prisoners in such an inhumane way has a PhD in religion. So that means,
mhm.
whoa, you mean You mean you can get to the highest level of education and be a monster? How about that?
I love that. You know, it's funny you said that because I do something similar. Starting from that place in the beginning, I do 2 things with my courses. One of them, especially with the methods, is I have students read the book, by Sandra McGuire
Mm.
on teaching students how to learn and teaching yourself how to learn, because one of the things we talk about is, how you view yourself as a learner will determine how you teach,
Yes,
and
yeah.
how you view others as a learner.
Mhm, mhm. Very
And I
nice.
also start, especially yeah, especially in the educational psychology course, I start with I share Brené Brown's talks on shame.
Mhm. Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's an important part of our experience, and so much in the society, the larger society, um, prepares
Mhm.
you to feel shamed, ashamed for your body, ashamed for who you are as an ethnic person, and so that means we have to deconstruct the way the society works.
Right. And oftentimes, whatever a background is, whether we come from a background where we've been brutalized, right, and turn to brutalizing others, or we've been, whatever it is, whatever shame we've experienced, often leads us in some way to inflict that, right,
Mhm,
on someone else, in the way we approach, whether we've been shamed by our parents, or, or we've had domineering parents or never
mhm.
been given a voice. We end up sometimes without realizing and being aware of it. Um,
Yeah, that happens too. Mhm. So I
mhm,
think when you engage with other
wow.
cultures, we study Native American experiences, we see that, what we think
Mhm,
is just human behavior is specific to a particular culture. It's not, they don't do it over there.
mhm,
Then we say, oh, I wonder
yeah,
that's about. So again, opening up your knowledge, the base of knowledge that you have makes it possible for you to ask different questions and see things differently.
yeah, wow, wow. Oh my goodness. I know that I'm looking to see my other book. I know that you and I can keep going on and on talking here. This is amazing conversation. What do you think, especially when I think about, what are some takeaways you want to leave our audience with, especially when you think about, go ahead.
Takeaways? What am I thinking about what?
Well, what do we need as Black people? I just remember this other question I really wanted to ask you. What do we need as
Mhm.
Black people, you think, when it comes to just in general or in our education? Just what comes to
Well, I
mind?
think, what we need has to be contextualized in terms
Mm,
of where we are
mhm,
in our social circumstance. So,
mhm,
you are a well-to-do, upper middle class, highly paid, person, and you're raising your children. What do your children need? They have, quote, unquote, "everything." But
mhm,
do they really? How do
mhm,
you prepare children who are in the, quote, unquote, "middle class" or upper middle class to be better human beings when they have, quote,
mhm,
unquote, "everything"? So what they need may be very different from what a child growing up in a very impoverished circumstance, doesn't have food every day, is, really challenged with material things, but that child may actually have more human connection than the child in the well-off circumstance. So I think
mhm,
we have to analyze
mhm,
what our circumstance is and see
mhm,
where are we trying to go as people. What is it that who are the people we're trying to produce for the world?
mhm.
So I always
Wow,
start some kind of analysis, not just a formula that applies to everybody.
wow. That's so true. Because even you see how we can put each other in a box as well,
Sure, sure,
as
sure.
we've been put in boxes.
Mhm.
Um,
But I think we need
wow.
more humility, we need more patience, and we
Mhm,
need belief. We need belief in who we are in terms of who our ancestors were, what they did to get us here, and what
Mhm.
our responsibility is. So if we begin to think that way, that allows us to have a lens to look at our circumstance.
Mhm. And even, realizing there's not necessarily one way to get there,
Mhm.
um,
Exactly. Mhm. I really
and
believe.
analyzing that.
Mhm.
What's that?
Mhm. I said I really believe that. We don't all have to do the same thing. I've said that many times.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Right. It's very fascinating. I realize there are questions I realize I could easily go down another road here, especially since especially if we were involved some of the things that I'm observing, with in Africa. Well, I guess we could table that. It's fascinating because I think there's such a temptation to not only think the grass is greener, but also to not just mourn something we didn't have because we didn't have, that connection and that's lost. Um but also to not analyze really what's going on and what it would mean for us, especially since we've also um we have a different context now, right?
Mhm.
And in the way
Mhm.
we fight, you know.
Well, there's so many distractions, intentional distractions. I mean, the media, the materialism, the way in which people are pitted against each other, the idea that if I
Yeah.
got it, you can't have it. I mean, these are elements
Mhm.
of this culture. And when you
Mhm.
travel or you have connections with other communities and you are able to understand, well, it doesn't have to be this way. This is something that's been passed down to us, but maybe it's not something we need to keep. But that
Mhm.
again comes from a broader exposure. And how can
Mhm.
our young people get exposure? Well, it's not through the television because the television and movies are giving you a very narrow,
Mhm.
representation of humanity, but we have to seek out those other opportunities for our children to learn, to
Right.
really engage, and I think specifically looking at family history, um, delving into the story of your own family, learning more about your ancestors. This is a process that you can engage young people with. They may not be interested immediately, but if you
Mhm.
stick with it, you can find out what matters to them and you can
Mhm.
follow up from there.
Wow. I'm curious, have you given any thought to AI and the role in your
I've had
work?
lots of
Have you
conversations with people about AI and,
Mhm.
people who say, "Oh, it's dangerous. It's gonna eliminate our jobs and it's racist," which I think is probably there's truth in that. But then there's also the possibility that we can, as we do with many things, we can bend it and make it work on our behalf if we have the
Mhm.
knowledge not to just be consumers, but to be
Mhm.
producers. So this isn't
Yeah.
anything different than it's always been. We're faced, um, making things more human all the time.
Right. Wow. The needs are still the same, right? The need to teach people how to think and to think
Mhm.
critically,
Yes, 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 yes.
the need to teach AI even how to think.
Mm.
Um
Well, we don't have a lot
and
of time. We better hurry up.
I think the motives remain the same. That we can say, right? The underlying motives remain the same, which will be fascinating to watch how that plays out.
Well, we're at a point in the society where what was hidden is now more obvious
Mhm.
in the open.
Right.
The fact that our labor is not needed as it was in the past, what are they gonna do with us, you know? Uh,
Mhm.
so we are
Yeah.
now really almost in open warfare against our survival as a people, as African people,
Mhm.
as Latino people. I mean, s
Mhm.
animosity, the hatred, the violence, it's all coming out in the open, but,
Yeah.
there are those who think that we don't have any answer or we don't have any way of responding, but that's not true. We've always had a way of responding, and we just have to remember that.
Right. Because we've had to think deeply,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know? We don't necessarily have the luxury of simply reacting.
Right. One of the books I
Um,
used in my classes is, I use The African by Harold Kurlander, which was the
mhm,
story that, Alex Haley used to develop, the whole, um, narrative of Roots. So the
mhm,
character in The African is a young boy who is captured and enslaved at the age of 12, but he's gone through his community's rites of passage. So he has a
mhm,
sense of who he is and he has a spiritual center. So he goes through many experiences. He's enslaved, brutalized. He has a maroon experience and he ends up on a Georgia plantation and
mm,
he's hearing about this place called Liberty Island, and he decides if he can just escape and get to Liberty Island, that will be the answer to his problem. So he on the plantation, he sees some Africans who were born on the plantation and they've lost all their African sense of who they are, but he is able to bring some ritual and some cultural patterns to that context. But he escapes
mm,
and he's on his way to Liberty Island
mhm,
and he meets some people coming from the other direction. And he asks them, "Well, where are
mhm,
you?" Said, "We trying to get away from Liberty Island." He said, "Well, that's where I'm trying to go." They said, "No, you don't wanna go there." But he's convinced if he can get to Liberty Island, that's where freedom is. So he gets there, and of course,
mhm,
the Africans have reproduced the plantation worldview, and they're oppressing each other, and so now what is gonna be
mm,
the solution? And he's able to return
mm,
to the practices of his community, that communal self-determination, and we're gonna survive together, and that's how the story ends. And then I tell my students,
mhm.
"A white man wrote this book." They say, "Oh, Dr. King, that's not possible. How could a white man tell this sto" "Yes, it's a white man wrote." But he's a
Mhm,
folklorist, so his whole
mhm,
understanding is informed by culture from the inside out, and that's how he's able to tell our story
mm.
so authentically and truthfully.
Wow.
So there are many lessons in.
Right.
And so we don't wanna be on Liberty Island.
Yeah.
We wanna know our heritage
It's
knowledge.
right.
So
Wow.
that's one of the tools I
Oh my
use,
gosh.
to get us thinking about analyzing the reality that we're in and what resources do we have to respond.
My goodness. Dr. King, what an amazing conversation.
Thank you for the
I
invitation.
thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks for giving me the honors here.
Oh, you're so
I
welcome.
had shared this and I had shared this with some of my peers and peers that you're probably familiar with.
Mhm.
And so just to let you know, they were congratulating me.
Okay.
Even they were amazed that you took the time, and I really, really appreciate it. It's been an honor, and I am to be congratulated that I had the opportunity to sit down and have this
Well,
conversation with
thank you
you,
for the
and I hope
invitation.
it's not our last.
Right, and I'm so happy to learn about your grandmother and her curls.
No. I do. I share her sometimes even on my talks.
Mhm.
So thank you.
Okay, so have a wonderful day.
So, thank you. And I want to say if you enjoy this talk with Dr. King, please like it and subscribe. And so you can also be alerted when the podcast version is out. And thank you for joining today. I'm just
Okay.
going to, I push stop.